welcome everybody to RECO12. My name is Justin, and I am a son of God and an addict, and the host of the RECO12 speaker meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am living in the relatively happy, joyous, and free that is promised to those living in recovery, and have been very active in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013. Welcome to RECO12. RECO12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions with such variety as alcoholism, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, codependency, and all of the anon groups. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of that speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you are hearing the meeting in recorded podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, please go to www.reco12.com, that's RECO12.com, to learn more and submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations. RECO12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our 12th step in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions, and I'll put the link in the chat of the live meeting in the show notes of the podcast if you would like to contribute. And today, we're grateful that any contributions that come to this meeting, which is meeting 107, will be going to twowayprayer.org to support Father Bill W. in his work there. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now let's introduce our guest speaker for today, Sid K., whose chosen topic is living a surrendered life. Now here's a little bit about Sid. Sid is a grateful, recovered addict living in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was brought into recovery from drug and alcohol addiction in 2015 at the age of 18 and has since sought to bring God into every area of his life to live happily and usefully, whole, free from all addiction. He is also the founder of the Pioneer Program Research Group, which seeks to conduct unbiased, fact-based research into the program of action undertaken by the early members of Alcoholics Anonymous of 1935 through 1939. Their mission is to conduct and share this research, making it free and accessible for all in hopes that they may one day better see and pass along an authentic representation of how the pioneers practice their recovery program. Sid, the floor is yours. Take it away. Excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, I'm Sid. I'm a grateful, recovered alcoholic, addict, all over the place. So I could qualify for many fellowships. I want to say, when I asked God what the topic should be, I had plenty of ideas, but this is something that was coming to me of living the surrendered life. And when I was asking God for direction on what do I need to talk about, and these ideas were coming to my mind, and the guidance I was getting was just share your story, like that should be sufficient. And so that's what I'm going to try to do my best to do. I do want to say I got some pride problems. I don't know if anyone can identify with that. And so God was directing me to share that. I had a funny experience. I'm walking with a cane recently, because I've had back issues for the past couple of years, and it just, I had a really good laugh. I was sitting in a meeting the other night, and I was just sitting there, and I was thinking, what to share and all that. And I'm praying and asking God, God, I don't want to think like this. I don't want to be prideful. I don't want to be judgmental. And it just occurred to me, like, you would think that a cane would bring some sort of humility, and I just got a good laugh out of it. But I was guided to share that experience too. So hopefully, God will speak through me and direct my words in a way that's useful to other people. But yeah, so I'll share. I started drinking and using when I was an adolescent, probably around 13 or 14 years old. And I was a periodic drinker and drug user and that was not of my own choice. That was because I was being stopped by external circumstances. And so, but I did experience what our literature talks about, the physical allergy, this alcoholic compulsion of once I start drinking or using, that I don't get to choose what happens after that. I might drink for a day, I might drink for 3 months, and it's like I had just planned on a Friday evening and it's 3 months later and I'm still drinking and getting high. And that also means I don't have the power to stop. And that's why I say I was brought into recovery. I didn't get sober. I didn't choose to get sober. I don't have the power to get sober. God brought me into recovery in a blackout. I was, this is January 8th to February 15th of 2015. I was on this binge, and I was daily blacking out. And in that blackout, I reached out and asked for help and woke up, 3 hours away, sober, and getting sober again. Not what I wanted to happen. And so that wasn't me. And I also experienced that mental obsession, the alcoholic insanity that no matter what, I will drink again. I'm powerless over the first drink, whether I have, 1 day or 7 years. Once the drugs and alcohol are out of me, I'll always go back. And I didn't know these things. February 16th, 2015 is my sobriety date from drugs and alcohol. I didn't know these things, but what I did know is I was hopeless. I had tried, this was probably my 20th time swearing off or trying to quit drinking. And this was my 4th time with 12-step recovery at all. And I did not feel like there was any hope left. I was assuming that I would drink and use again. That was the mindset I had at that point because I knew all my efforts were futile. And I also knew that I couldn't do that, because it's, I don't know what will happen. And so I was really hopeless. And I think that's what's called for in the first step. I might not understand, the principle of the physical allergy and mental obsession, right away, but I did know I was hopeless. And what happened for me was I was 18 years old and I got a sponsor. And about 2 months sober, the first 2 months, terrible. You take drinking and using out of my life, and I need a solution to deal with me, and these, the loud, raucous voices of self that are going on in my mind. And, mostly what I'll do, I do believe if the spiritual malady is untreated, I'll just jump addictions. And so I did that, but I also got a sponsor at the same time. And the sponsor, he did something for me that hadn't been done before. So he started taking me through the big book word for word. And he really brought it to life for me. And he shared his experience with it. And he explained to me what it meant to him and how we could apply this. Now, I did something pretty common that I found in the rooms is that I really only applied, one, I didn't think the steps were going to work. That's irrelevant. I heard a good comparison. If Justin and I go up on the roof of his house and I say, Justin, I don't believe in gravity. And he says, well, I believe in gravity. And we both jump. Even though I think I'm going to float, I'm going to fall. And so I took that leap with the steps, even though I didn't think, I was going to fall. And it worked, and so the common mistake I did is the third step for me became, I'm willing to take these next couple steps. I'm willing to do these steps. I'm willing to do this stuff because I think that will stop me from drinking, or I didn't even believe that, or I just think something might happen. And so that's why I did it. I definitely was not surrendering my will and my life over to the care of a power greater than myself. We did a 4th and 5th step. I sat on that for a couple months. As there was conduct I was still continuing to do, in other addictions that I wasn't willing to look at. And so it's real easy. I heard someone say, I think they said, it's a lot easier to add more to the sex inventory than to sit down and write the past conduct. And so, eventually I did do that 5th step with my sponsor, and it was helpful. And he pointed out, here's some defects of character. But after then we prayed together, took 6 and 7 in that way. But I really didn't have a conviction of my separation for God or my need for God. And there's something the Oxford group had called the 5 C's of soul surgery. And they talk about confidence, confession, conviction, conversion, continuance. And the whole point, and 5, 6, and 7 was confession, and 6 was conviction, and 7 was conversion. And it was your confession should automatically lead you into a conviction of your separateness from God and your need for God. And that will set you up with this conversion experience of giving your whole life over to God. If I don't have that experience, which I didn't, there's no reason for me to give any area of my life over to God. I can say, hey, my past conduct, not so great. I realize I got some defects, and now I'm going to turn this God help program into a self-help program and really, take a crack at it my way. And so that's what I did. And because of that, now I made amends, but because of that, I did not feel a need to do 10 and 11. There was really no need. I mean, why would I need to do that? I thought that was optional. My grand sponsor said, he said it's insanity to belong to a 12-step fellowship and not work all 12 steps. And that's what I did. And I did the 2-step thing for a while of I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. I'm powerless. I need to help other people. And, I'm going to go pass this on to other people. I don't have to look within. I don't need God, within here. And some miraculous things did happen just by that, and the fellowship alone is that I was relieved of my obsession to drink and use drugs. That was taken from me, and that was an amazing experience. And that did bring me conviction that there was a higher power in my life, but not really any conviction that maybe I needed a relationship with this higher power. And so that's what happened to me. So then I started managing my work life and, my sex life. And I got on the dating apps and all this stuff. And I've been doing all this, and this is the recognition I need at work. And this is the recognition I need in AA. And this is what my family needs to do and all of these things. And so what my program looked like was that I would wake up in the morning, I would mumble the 3rd and 7th step prayer. I'd run off and do whatever I wanted to do. Now I got really, into lifting weights, and I got to look good, and the vanity and the pride, because it was still these unaddressed fear of what other people thought of me, fear of not being sufficient, not being lovable. And so these are just going to come out in different ways. I'd go off to work, and I used to manage a restaurant when I was 20 years old. And that was, I had a good time at that, telling everyone what to do and writing people up and firing people and, like you're just running the show. And I'd constantly be in fear about the performance of that, and fear of, not getting a relationship, and fear, of what other people thought of me. And then I'd constantly be getting resentful. I'd constantly be acting selfish, so that these fears don't come through. I got to take the action to make sure these don't happen. I got to lie to other people to make sure they don't find out about these fears. And if they have any intimation that these fears might be real, I'm going to get resentful real quick. And that's how I lived my life. I didn't know there was another option available. Now, God did some things for me in my life, and I can't tell you the exact order, but there's a couple of things that happened. Is that I did realize my sex conduct was harmful and that I needed to do something to change. I just thought I can apply the steps here. I already got it. That's the basic principle of AA was missing, of one alcoholic helping another. But, God can do this. And I have met people who are okay with just, they're able to take it to God, and then some people, some are sicker than others, or some need more help than others. And so, I just tried on my own, and nothing changed, so that was happening. But something did happen in that time, was that I did what was interesting was that my own attempts at dating were entirely unsuccessful. I don't know what I want. I'm fear-based, and I'm making these selfish decisions. And so I don't get anywhere. But I showed up, and now this is an interesting story of how God uses my defects. I wasn't at this manager position yet, and at the pizza company I was working at, and I went to this young people's committee, and they were doing elections for this host committee. Now, I was 2 years sober, and maybe less than that. I didn't have any experience with doing any sort of young people's, in AA service. And I decided it would be a good idea for me to stand for the chairperson of the host committee. That's a position I feel like I could do. And now they did a vote, and the other guy, he had 2 or 3 more votes than me, but not enough to knock me out. And we're using third legacy voting procedure. And so after the third vote, where we were still pretty close, They just had to pick the name out of the hat, and my name got called. And I was so excited about that, and I talked to my sponsor the next week, and he was like, yeah, I mean, you just, you weren't getting what you wanted at work, the prestige and the recognition. And so you decided to take it out here somewhere where you don't have any experience. And I was like, oh, I guess that's what it is. That wasn't fun to hear. And my sponsor me a lot, but I did have, I think pretty common too, is dependency on sponsors, is that I don't go to God first. I go to sponsors and I crowdsource my solutions to the fellowship. And then I usually still do what I think is best. And then I get upset and I come back with the same problem a couple of weeks later. And so that did happen. Now that pride came out and got me that service position. And what I found out was that the chairperson is not a leadership position. It's more of a babysitter position of making sure these other people on this committee don't cut each other's heads off, while we're doing these discussions. And so I really got to, it wasn't my ideas coming across or anything. It was listening and making sure everyone else was heard. And through that experience, there was a woman on the committee who I met and got to know. And, we were both showing up there to be of service. We weren't, and some pride, of course, for me. But, I wasn't there to date. And I got to know this woman. We got to become friends and we started dating. And today we've now been together for 5 years. We just got married last year. And so this is an example of how God would use my defects, right? So I'm not going to do this self-help eliminate my defects thing because I'm just not qualified to choose which ones stay and which ones go. So that's one thing that happened. Another thing that happened was, I was trying to figure out, do I need to go to some, a drug addict fellowship, or do I need to stay in AA? Because I got clean and sober in AA, while I'm mostly a drug addict. I'm going back and forth. And we did start some Drug Addicts Anonymous meetings. And this is back when I was in Raleigh, North Carolina. And they were wonderful things. But God was saying, hey, Sid, it's time for you to address your sex problems. And then you're probably going to have to go to a fellowship for that. So after 3 years of fighting that, I did go to another fellowship. It's like we don't have all the answers, more will be revealed. And if God, I can't just keep praying to God and asking for help and then not accepting the help when it's available. So that was something I did around that time. And it was very difficult. You can imagine with my pride, to be this guy who sponsors a lot in AA and then just show up in this fellowship, and I'm not, I don't know what I'm talking about. And they told me, they said, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, you might have 4 years sober, but you don't know what you're talking about. This is different. And I got a lot of help there, and I'm really grateful for that experience. And that's just one experience for me of living the surrendered life, of bringing God into more than just my AA life. There's some pretty strong indications that this sex area of people's lives was very important to the pioneers of the program. In 1937, Rockefeller sent a reporter over to Akron to find out what do they got going on over there. And he came up with 7, steps in this technique that they were using in Akron, and they weren't the steps as we know them today. But it was the importance of quiet time. 1 hour quiet time every morning was mandatory, or else there was grave danger of backsliding. And the other thing it said was that the alcoholic ought to be willing to give up hate and adultery, and all these other defects that accompany alcoholism, or Dr. Bob and his associates would refuse to work with him. So that showed how they were taking, sex seriously. Hank Parkhurst, who helped Bill write the book, had a draft called Hank's Ideas, this 12-page draft, and he had a proposed Q&A section for the big book. And the 5 questions he shared there, these are like, just simple Q&A questions that an alcoholic might want to know about AA. And one of the questions was, what if the alcoholic has a sexual relapse? And it's very interesting, that language, that's from 1937, and the question, there's an early draft of Bill's story, not the manuscript form, but another one he wrote, you can find online, and it has all 10 questions Abby asked Bill. And one of the questions was, detail your sex, conduct since infancy, and detail where you went wrong and what you think you ought to have done instead. And so I just thought, hey, I'm 18, I'm 20, whatever, like I don't need to deal with this stuff. And yeah, I needed to bring God into every area of my life. And so that's, probably the second area I surrendered. Somewhere along the way, God also took away nicotine and smoking. And I can't tell you what I did, because it was just keep trying and keep asking, and God did something for me that I couldn't do for myself. The big turning point came when I was about 4 years sober, and I went to this convention. It's called the Appalachian Regional Roundup. And we almost didn't make it there. My wife and I, we were dating at the time. We got into this terrible argument. We made it 30 minutes and we turned around and came back home. And luckily we were able to, we were able to discuss and express our emotions and, find out what was going on that's causing the conflict and go to this conference renewed. We were late, but we almost didn't go. We almost weren't together, and we showed up at this convention, and there were a lot of people there who were talking about, my old sponsor, Mark Houston. And I was like, what are these guys talking about? And I saw some tapes on the table. I said, well, I'll get those on the way out. Sunday came around. Some other people had the same idea. There weren't any tapes left. And so I looked up this Mark Houston speaker tape, and I found this 2001 Fellowship of the Spirit. And it was him and this guy, Dave F. From New York. He lives down in Texas now. And it was 2001, and I think Dave had 19 years sober, something like that. And but they were talking, and I was just like, who's this other guy, Dave? I want to listen to Mark. And Mark had passed away in 2011. But what happened was they talked about God in a way that I hadn't heard before, or maybe I'd heard it and my ears weren't ready to hear it. But they talked about God. And one thing Dave said was, if, in his conception, if God is my father, how much time, does a father want to spend with his kids? Is he satisfied with 1 minute, 2 minutes? And I just thought of me mumbling and walking out the door, mumbling these prayers and walking out the door. And I just thought, maybe there's something better. And another thing that happened around this time is I had this back injury start. And so I was advised to start stretching every morning and evening. And I was like, man, I'm already on the ground. I can give it a shot, And so I was on the ground. I started saying the 3rd and 7th step prayer. And I started, instead of just saying it, I was like, what does this mean to me today? What areas of my life? What am I surrendering? What bondage of self? What defects? And that was very helpful. And the other thing I did was I followed the instructions on the 11th step on awakening of, I would ask God to direct my thinking and think about the day ahead. And, and I would think about the problems I was going to face that day. So instead of going into the day at work with this fear and then get resentful when someone, makes something wrong. And, I was able to say, God, I'm going to have this fear today, and I'm going to get resentful at someone. I don't want to have this. What should I do instead? Can you come with me? And that was a really big change. And that's where I think I started living the surrendered life. And what happened was, so back in Sam Shoemaker is the Oxford Group head in the U.S. He taught Bill the principles behind these steps. We just didn't have steps yet. But he called this the second, third step idea was the experiment or hypothesis of faith. So for so long, I had thought that I was supposed to get some conviction in me, and then that would give me the ability to do 10 and 11. That would bring me to a better plane of living. And what Sam was saying was the exact opposite. And they would take people through the steps very quickly. One day, maybe 2 visits, it was different in Akron and Cleveland and New York. And then they would start on this experiment. And it's the experiment of faith. Make God the most important thing in your life. That's the daily quiet time every morning, these nightly inventories, which for them was just going to Dr. Bob's house and sharing how the day went and what difficulties they had, and just making God the most important thing in your life. And so what happened to me by trying this experiment, I had an experience. And that experience was that when I make God a priority in my life goes so much better, and I was waiting for God to, make my life much better. And then I would make God a priority. I was waiting for these beliefs to come, and then I would act on those beliefs. And what this experiment of faith did for me was that I started acting, and taking these actions. And that led me to an experience with God that informed the beliefs that I have today. And it was completely backwards than what I had expected. And since then, and another thing that happened is I just can't spend this time praying and meditating. Thanks, Justin. I'd take, a couple of minutes here and there, and, but after hearing that tape, I woke up one day at 3 a.m. That doesn't happen to me, and I was full of energy. I couldn't go back to sleep. And I thought, well, I'll just try praying and meditating. And that was another thing that really strengthened my conviction, and I spent 2-3 hours meditating that morning, and just an amazing experience. And it was like, I'm going to do this every morning. And after that, I started prioritizing. Now, I wasn't waking up, at 3 a.m., but I did wake up earlier. And just these amazing things started to happen. Another thing that happened for me was, I used to really have trouble with meditation. I thought of meditation as this, focus on your breathing, clear your mind. And that was really this Eastern meditation that came over to the US in the 60s. The definition of meditation they had, it's from a 1913 Webster's, is that it's closed or continued thought, reflection, the musing of a topic on the mind. And so really it's more of the word contemplation. And what they would do and what they were musing in their mind was God's love and God's will. What's God's will for me in every area of my life? And so that's what I started doing. And at the same time, also this guy, Dave in Texas, I got up with him, 19 years or 18 years after listening, after that tape was recorded. And he helped me out tremendously. And I sent him my inventories every day for like 3 years. And he would send me all this feedback. And, you said you're resentful, but you weren't dishonest. How is that possible? You said you're resentful, but you're not fearful. You can't have a resentment without fear, and all this stuff. And I guess, what's happened most recently is that, about 18 months ago, I discovered the two-way prayer website and looking at how were the pioneers practicing two-way prayer and, contemplating what's God's will for me in my life. And so what's happened as a result of that, to me, living this surrendered life or this guided life to me means that today, like my life is unmanageable, right? And so the prayer where Bill got the word unmanageable from was this guy, Victor Kitchen in the Oxford group, who had this prayer, God, I can't manage my life, manage it for me. And what I did the first couple of years of sobriety was, God, I can't manage my drinking. I'm going to start managing my life, and what changed is that I got a new manager. I started asking God for direction in every area of my life. And there have been plenty of, trials and tribulations. And like I said, the past month I've been walking with a cane, and I had to have surgery last year. And, all these things, there's terrible. I've had friends who've passed away, from addiction, and all these things keep happening, right? But today I'm asking God for direction in every area of my life. And I asked God about today. God said, share your problem with your pride first, get that out of the way. That's important for you to share, and I can't tell you, I don't think I've got a direct line to God or something. I think that, that I have a relationship, with my higher power. Before I was blocked off from God, I was blocked off from others, and I was blocked off from who I think God wanted me to be. And what I did through working the steps is I removed those blocks and I turned those, those barriers between me and my fellows into bridges, and the ninth step became more about what can I do for others, and how can God work through me and work through them than just about I need to feel better, and just all these things happen. I just really can't put words to it, but I can tell you today that to me, living the surrendered life means that I bring all my problems, sex, food, money, work, relationship, everything to my higher power. And I bring it to my higher power first. And then if it's important or if it's questionable, that's when I bring it with other people. Whereas before I would crowdsource all my solutions, and my sponsor he'd pick up the phone and he'd say, did you pray about it? I said, of course not. That's why I'm calling you. And today it's the exact opposite. And I've just had to find other people who are on this spiritual path. And their path might look different than mine. They might use different spiritual tools than me. But today we're all seeking this wholeness. I don't want to get sober just to live in another addiction. And today I'm free from my addictions And today I'm not the hole in the donut. God will only, he'll leave me enough, and everything that I have, he's made useful. And so I'm really grateful today for God giving me this new perspective and this new life. And I'm really grateful to be here. So I hope that was helpful to somebody. Thank you.
A higher consumption of vegetables may cut your odds of developing depression by as much as 62%. An American Cancer Society study found that women who sit for more than 6 hours a day have a 40% higher death rate. Hi, my name is Maya Acosta, and I'm a health and wellness educator and host of the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast. Join me and the amazing people that I get to talk to as I set out to learn how to improve our quality of life and increase our longevity. You can listen at the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast or at healthylifestylesolutions.org.
Thank you, Sid. Thank you so much. And I love that last. I'm going to come to a question here in a minute about the hole in the donut, making you enough with the donut, But before we get to that, I just want to thank you once again for sharing your experience, strength, and hope on this, and remind our live audience in the webinar here, if you have questions for Sid, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your window. It looks like two speech bubbles over the top of each other. We'll get to those as we go along. I've also written down several questions on my end here, and I'd like to start with one of those questions. You just mentioned you're no longer the hole in the donut. One of the phrases that I've been using a lot in my prayer recently, in two-way prayer and in my regular prayer, is make me sufficient for your needs and bless me with sufficient for my needs. Does that what does that mean to you in this experience of being the hole or not being the hole in the donut anymore?
Yeah, I like what Bill wrote in the 12 and 12 about, when Bill said we should be aiming for spiritual perfection. We're aiming for that and in hopes that we'll land at spiritual progress. And he said, well, what if all these defects are removed? One, that has not been my experience, is that God has just gone around, all my defects are wiped clean. I think, like as I shared the experience, that God needs some of my defects for me to be useful to other people and for me to live a full life. So one, that's not going to happen. That hasn't happened to me. I haven't met anybody that's happened to, regardless if they have 50 years or what. And, but it was that idea, right, that if I gave my whole life to God, then what do I get, and who am I going to be? And honestly, that's just not important to me anymore. Whatever happens, I'm okay with, if I have to walk with this cane for another 50 years, like I can work with that, that's not a problem. And, if God takes these defects of character away, for me to live happily, like I'm not so worried about, well, what about my personality? I think, God has made us all unique in a way, that we can express God's love to each other, and to limit that uniqueness would be to limit God. And so that's just not been my experience. I also want to say I'm not a professional. I'm not an advanced member of, AA or anything. I'm just a guy. I'm just trying to practice spiritual principles. So yeah, take what I have with a grain of salt.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sid. We've got a few questions that are coming in from our webinar audience. First one we'll go to is from Sophia. Sophia says, "Hey, Sid, thank you so much for your share. When you started with pride, it was a God shot for me. Can you say a little more about how you progressed from friendship with a fellow to dating her romantically? For example, did you work steps in SLA or any other fellowship in that process?"
I wish I could tell you, hey, this is what it looks like, and this is what it should look like for other people. I didn't end up, in a sex addiction fellowship until after we were dating. What I can tell you, all I can tell you is that she showed up in my life without me looking for her. I wasn't looking for that relationship there. I was just looking to be of service. Now, having said that, and she supported me through my recovery as it's taken me in these different areas. Now, I'll tell you what has been helpful. Obviously, if you've got a sex addiction or a relationship addiction, you're going to have to, I don't know anyone who's not treated that and been successful. And I just had a sponsee who relapsed to, intravenous heroin use over, cheating on his fiance. I had a sponsee a couple of years ago who returned to use after his, sex conduct was out of control. So I think, I mean, there's a lot of great tools. I think God's given us so much on this, on this earth. And what I found useful is, I've been different therapy has been helpful if you have, issues that, that I don't know, that need therapy. What's also been helpful to me, my sponsor is really big. He's really big in Al-Anon, and he's helped me a lot with, it's nothing new, it's like, we've got it here. And it's just my obsession with other people and how they need to be. And so he's helped me, that's what the work we've done together, and looking at the last podcast, you had the 12 traditions and relationships. Those have been helpful. I worked through those with one of my past sponsors. I'm working through it with my current sponsor. And what I'll tell you now with the two-way prayers, anytime I'm having an issue with myself or my wife, I'm bringing it to prayer, and then I'm bringing it to other people. I'm trying to find out what in me is causing this problem, what's creating this tension in me, and asking God, what do I need to do differently? And sometimes God says, hey, you need to call Jim, and talk to him about it. He's already got the experience. And so, yeah, that's what I can say is like, what I've seen for the sex addicts that I help is, for them, it's getting sober from lust, breaking free of that dependency. I only sponsor men there. And so it's, for them unlearning, what they've been taught, what it means to be a man, and relearning like healthy masculinity. There's great resources on that, learning where fear and selfishness are in their relationships, and then learning healthy intimacy, which is not sex. Sex and intimacy are not synonyms. To me, I heard the speaker and he said, intimacy, sex is the celebration of intimacy. If you're not having sex, maybe you don't have intimacy. And another speaker said it's into me see. Can I be vulnerable? And so I've worked with these sex addicts, and they're always asking, when can I start dating? And I said, well, sure, you can start dating once you're ready to tell them, that you're a sex addict and these are the problems you've had, and that, this is your sexual hangups, and, because by then you'll have been intimate with them, and so they recoil at that thought, and so it's been, all I can say is bring God into that area of your life and seek out other people who are doing the same. And I think God will provide you whatever resources you need there.
Thank you, Sid. I appreciate that. I think there's some good information in there. Thank you. All right. Next question from Scott from our live audience here. In war, we see surrender as a sign of weakness, but in recovery, how is surrender seen as victory?
Yeah, I like, there's a bookmark that I think Akron or Cleveland has, and it's like the 4 paradoxes of AA. It came from a story that was in a previous edition that's been removed now. And I think one of the paradoxes was freedom through surrender. And so it's like I was talking about this hole in the donut. Well, I want my life, and this is how I want to live it. Well, guess what? If I'm in the bondage of self, I am not free. I am being driven by whatever thoughts come into my mind, whatever I'm identifying with myself, what I think I need. I'm not free. I'm just going wherever I want. And then I think, oh, this is freedom. I couldn't turn this over to God. I'd lose freedom, and it's like I keep doing the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I ought to do. Like, that's not freedom. And so to me, surrender is that God is enabling me to live up to, this God within me, the image of God within me, and this, this person that I can be through God instead of, the ego-driven Sid, and so surrender has given me freedom. And that's what Mark Houston always used to say, how free do you want to be? It's like, you just want to be done with alcoholism. And there's this pamphlet in Akron called The Second Reader for Alcoholics Anonymous. And it said, what is there in AA for me beyond mere sobriety? And like, I need more, I need freedom, and I found that God is sufficient to provide that freedom. If only I give my problems to him, he'll enable me, as much as I rely on him, that's how much he'll enable me with, empower me with freedom.
Trouble sleeping? If so, you're not alone. I'm Ashley Lambert, host of the Very Sleepy podcast, where you fall asleep fast to short stories and meditations and delta wave music. You might not even make it through the entire episode before you drift off to sleep. Very sleepy. Fall asleep fast. Good night.
Love it. And I think that answered another question that came up is, how does God fight that battle for us? And I think you got there. One thing that you shared is brought me to So there's another guest speaker that'll be coming up, I think in September, that I just lined up this last week. And her topic is going to be, I can choose to use. Shoot. The choice to use is mine for once, is basically what it is. Before I couldn't choose, but now I live in freedom to where I could choose to. I choose not to, but the choice is mine now. And I think that goes along with the surrender topic. I can choose to drink. I could choose to do these things. It's not a compulsion anymore. If I'm living in recovery, it's now a choice, but I choose not to. Do you have any thoughts on that, or any?
Yeah, I think about it a little bit differently. I don't think there's a right way. I think that's her experience, right? And that is also kind of my experience, So the way I think about it is that I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol and my, addictive behaviors in body. That means when I start, I don't get to choose when I stop. I'm also powerless in mind. You see people go back after years. I've seen plenty of people. I'm at 7 years. I've seen plenty of people go back at 7 years, and plenty go back even further than that. And so to me, when someone says, at 10 years, I decided to use, if you can decide to use, then you might not be an alcoholic, because, like I don't decide to drink. I don't decide to use. If the thought comes back into my mind and I don't have effective mental defense from my higher power, then I will use, So that's not a choice I'm making. There's one choice that I make every day, and that choice is on the bottom of page 25, and it says, I'm either going to blot out, this miserable life that I have, or I'm going to accept spiritual help. And so what I've found is I'm still powerless, over drugs and alcohol and these addictive behaviors. I don't engage in them because I accept spiritual help and God has kept me away from them. But if I ever think like, okay, I'll be able to, and the thoughts will come, right? I'll have the thoughts. There's nothing wrong with having a thought pop up in my head. It's that before the thought would come up and I had no effective mental defense. And so today, through accepting spiritual help, God has given me effective mental defense. So to me, that's the choice I make. Am I going to accept spiritual help in every area of my life? Or am I not going to do that and then just wait for me to end up drinking and using again, which is my experience of what happens when we don't do that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. All right, next question from our live audience from Sam. Sam asks, what do you personally do when you pray for answers, doing everything you know how in regards to surrendering your will, and there is nothing, no negative feelings, nor positive, no thoughts that lead toward an answer, nothing? How do you proceed when nothing happens?
Well, that's a good question. I think nothing sometimes going to happen, right? God's time is a little bit different than my time. And so one example I'll give you is, when I started having these back problems and they progressed to, even the 2 years ago, I was very little activity. I couldn't walk much, I really couldn't do much. I was constantly in pain, to the point they had to put me on opiates. And then, my wife, she would hold on to them. I told her, and she'd say, and I'd tell her, you got to ask me two things before you give me these as prescribed. Is, did you pray and did you eat? And so you can say I was in a hopeless situation then, and I thought this surgery was going to do the trick last year, and it didn't do the trick, the way that I thought it would. And so then December, I had this, the recurrence of these back issues, and they went away again for a little bit, and then came back in March. And since March, I've had a lot of difficulty walking. And the first 2 months, I was pretty upset. And I'll tell you what, I'm asking God for help, and God is not telling me, hey, Sid, these are the core exercises you need to do. And once you do that, you'll be good to walk, or this is how you need to stretch your back, or God's not saying go to this doctor, and all I'm getting is, patience is pretty much, I'm not getting the answer I want. So I'd say sometimes getting nothing just means I'm not getting the answer I want. And so I've just had to trust and rely on God. And that's when a month and a half ago or a month ago is when I realized the only thing holding me back from not being in pain from walking is my pride, which is stopping me from getting a cane, And so then I got the cane, and I took that to meeting and I took it to work. And so I think I'm not going to get direct answers all the time. I think I can pretty safely say what's coming from me. It's not hard to say, hey, that's selfish. Hey, that's dishonest. Hey, that's fearful. And when those are coming, I'm not going to do those things. And I might be waiting on God to give me an answer on what it looks like, what I need to do, but I can step out in faith in the meantime, while I'm waiting on that answer, and it'll be revealed. We always see it when we look back, we see that God had done for us what we couldn't do for ourselves, but it might not be right in that moment. So I've just found I'm okay with whatever God's got planned, and then my ego might not like it, but today I'm okay with it, whatever those answers or non-answers are.
I love that. And I love to try and live there. And then I'll wake up one morning and be like, no, I want to know now. Give me this answer now, dang it. And get impatient with God. And I just have to remember it's not my timing. I'm not the director. If I'm the director, I make a giant mess of things. Thanks for sharing that. All right. Next question comes from Todd. And I love this phrase here, but he asks, how did you drop the rock? And that's his question there. So how did you drop the rock?
I guess I'll come back to saying too, I'm not choosing what defects come and go. What I will say is that I gained that conviction that a life with God is better than a life without God. And that's what changed for me. And that came to me listening to these speaker tapes and hearing that example in someone else's life, and then trying this experiment. It wasn't something, and so that's all I can say is try the experiment of faith of make God the most important, area of your life, the most important thing in your life, and apply God into every area, and I think whatever I keep in the dark recesses of my mind will eventually come out. I might as well just bring it all to God and ask God for the solution and the treatment of my problems. And again, my problems aren't going to be treated the way I want them to, if I've got, these problems and I want them to go away now, that might not be God's plan. And so I'm not getting to choose what comes and goes. All I'm saying is, God, I'm struggling with this, or here's what problem I'm dealing with. Can you give me some direction on what you would like me to do, how you would like me to be? And then I do my best to follow that direction. And if God finds it, so that I don't need to act in those behaviors again, and then I don't. And some of those things have been lifted right out of me, but I just don't have the ability to choose. I don't know what's good and I don't know what's bad. I can't live in this black and white, all or nothing, right or wrong world. All I can know is whatever comes up to me, I'm bringing up to God. I do a daily inventory to see where I'm coming up. I'm doing daily, asking God for guidance, and then I try to live in that guidance. And I just try to, I live by the four absolutes, as best as I can, of trying to be, unselfish and honest and pure in my thinking and in my motives, and following my two-way prayer, and I try to love myself and love God as God loves myself as God loves me, and love others as God loves them. And I follow these things up with the grace that I know that I'll fall short, but God's grace is enough for me in that, and the courage to try to do these things anyways. And I found, I'm sure there's plenty of rocks I've dropped, and I'm sure I got a couple in my pocket right now. I just don't, I don't know what's happening, but I do know my life with God is better than without God.
I love that. And recently I heard somebody say this, and I put it to practice a few times in my own two-way prayer, but to say, God, the answer is yes. Now, what do you want me to do? And that scared the death out of me the first time I tried that, because I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to ask me to do something that I have no idea what to do. Have you ever approached things that way? Hey, the answer is yes, no matter what you ask me to do. Now, what is it you want me to do?
So I don't know if I took that attitude, but there have been some things that came up. And in the amends, in the big book, it says, that we have to be willing to make these things right, regardless of how the negative effects it might have on us. And so when I was, I think, 4 years sober, maybe 5 years sober, I gained the conviction that I need to make amends for cheating in college. And I was still on that point where I was like crowdsourcing, and I talked to all these I talked to my grant sponsor, and I talked to his sponsor, I talked to this other guy, and I'm getting different answers from everybody, but God had already put that conviction in my heart, and I remember I told my wife, and she was very scared, she said, everything that you've worked for, we could lose it. You might get kicked out, you won't get into the master's program, you won't get this job. And I said, well, I can always go back to working in the pizza industry. I just trusted that God was going to take care of me. And that's the attitude I have to take. And God did take care of me. It turns out, that what I thought was cheating was actually open note quizzes and stuff. And so, it wasn't, cheating in that professor's eyes. But I've just had to, I had to surrender my fears of what the outcome is going to be and just say, God, I'm going to walk out on faith on this. And that's why checking my two-way prayer is important, right? Just to make sure I don't go and do anything crazy. Is it honest? Is it pure? Is it loving? And is it unselfish? And if it's still questionable, then I'll ask someone else who's following this way of life to see what's going on. But worst case scenario, I found that I just end up doing honest, loving, pure, and unselfish things. And even if that's coming from me and not from God, I'm all right with that outcome because I'm much more satisfied with the quality of my life.
Love it. Love the four absolutes in real life application. All right. One more question from our audience. Sophia asks, as a sponsor, what do you do when a sponsee isn't willing to do the work? And then in an aside, I have only sponsored one person successfully through the whole 12 steps. So what do you do when someone isn't willing to do the work?
Well, so what's interesting is since I started, and we talked about it before the meeting started, so I sponsor a little bit differently now. I've done a lot of research in what sponsorship looked like from 35 through 39. And that's what I replicate, not because it's more effective. I think and all the 12-step fellowships are very effective for the people who honestly are willing to go to any lengths, just as it was back then. But I take people through the steps, the first 3 steps in one sitting, and I leave them with that 3rd step. And when they're ready to take that action, I help them through 4 through 8. I do that with them, just as the founders did. And then I teach them 9 through 12. And now it's their job to go and live in 9 through 12. They're going to walk that with me. We're going to do it together, but I can't do those for you. And what I found is the same people who weren't going to do their 4th step when I was making them write the whole thing out are the same people who aren't going to make their amends and who aren't going to do their daily quiet time. And I think there are people who are unable to, do all these things, right? I'm not asking you to live a perfect life. I'm asking you to try. I'm asking you to bring these things up and bring them into prayer. And so there's people who will fall short. They won't do the daily inventories. They won't do the daily two-way prayer. They won't, they need to pray longer for willingness on some of these amends, and I will walk with them as long as they're willing. But for the people who are not willing to try, I do, something my sponsor taught me, and maybe, I don't know if it came from Al-Anon or what, but it's just 3 strikes full of, like, hey, if you're not even trying, I'm just like, you're not going to get much out of us meeting up. I'm not going to get much out of us meeting up. And so we're just going to call that a strike. And if we get to 3 strikes, you have to find someone else who you'll listen to. I might not be the best person for you, and I don't think I'm the best person for everybody, but I do think they can get a lot better advice from God and check it with me than they can get from me. So I'm not running their lives. I'm just, hey, this is what I do. And I share my two-way prayer with them, and I share my daily inventories with them because they need to see I'm doing this with them. And I have the same sickness. I have the same spiritual malady that I'm treating, and so we walk this thing shoulder to shoulder. And it's a really beautiful thing to see people recover when we do that. And the ones who aren't going to do it, it's just not, hey, I'm here if you want help. But until then, there's nothing I can do.
Love it. Thank you so much, Sid. So before we get to our closing readings and send us off into the day, do you have any final words of wisdom to share with us?
Man, I hope, I hope there was some wisdom, in what I shared today. And all I can say is that I'm really grateful for what God has done in my life and for bringing me on to this meeting and this podcast. And I hope that what I said was helpful to somebody, and I hope that someone else gets to have an experience with God through trying this experiment of faith. Like, don't wait for the belief, take the experiment and see what happens. And I think I shared my email. If anyone wants to, it's aahistorynerd@gmail.com. And if anyone wants to reach out and there's anything I can do to help you on this path, I'm happy to try. But all I know is that God can do a lot more than I can do. And I'm just very grateful for what God has done in my life. And I hope there was more of him here today than there was of me. So thanks for letting me share.
Awesome. Thanks again, Sid. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If you have any other questions that you'd like to ask, please go to RECO12.com and join in our community on the website, or join in our private Facebook group and ask those questions and answer others' questions that will come up there. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you have not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. We actually had 5 or 6 new reviews this last week, and I'm really grateful for that. Get out there and join in the crowd. It's a great way to help us share this message with others in working our 12th step. Next week, we'll be hearing from Al N. He's sober in AA since 1974, and his topic will be what happens after our formal work is done. And I think that's a fantastic topic from somebody with a lot of experience. I've gotten to know Al a bit over the last handful of months, and he has a lot of great experience, strength, and hope to share. You won't want to miss this one. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the 7th step prayer that Sid has chosen, and we'll say.
My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, the good and the bad. I ask that you remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me the strength as I go out from here to do thy will. May I do thy will at least, thy will, not mine, be done.
Amen. Thank you, Sid. Everybody keep coming back. Come trudge this happy road with me. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of